In the spring of 1855, the Holloway family arrived in the Kentucky Highlands with a wagon full of broken tools, 3 children, and a promise they never should have believed. The hills were black with coal then, rich veins cutting through the limestone like rivers of darkness. Men said the land could make you wealthy if you were willing to dig deep enough. Samuel Holloway was. He was 37, a coal hauler from Pennsylvania who'd lost everything to a flood. His wife, Margaret, followed him reluctantly. She feared the mountains, the way they swallowed light at dusk. The locals whispered that the mines out here were different, older than the towns, older even than the settlers who named them. But Samuel didn't believe in whispers. He believed in pay. They bought a patch of land near a slope the miners called Dead Man's Hollow. The name didn't trouble him. Every mine had one. A warning turned into a joke. He built a small cabin beside the entrance, close enough that the children could see him descend each morning. The air was always colder near the shaft. Even in June, frost clung to the rocks like breath. The first weeks went well. Samuel worked with a local crew, rough men with soot-stained hands and missing teeth. They laughed at the newcomer's manners, but welcomed his strength. At night, he would tell Margaret that the mine was good, rich, steady. But then came the sounds. He said they started deep underground. Faint hums like someone humming through the stone. Sometimes the walls themselves seemed to vibrate, as though a giant heart beat behind them. The foreman, Everett Pike, said it was just air moving through the tunnels. But Samuel swore it wasn't. He said he felt it in his bones. By midsummer, men began refusing to work certain tunnels. Tools vanished. Mules refused to enter the lower shafts. And sometimes when Samuel came home late, his clothes smelled not of coal, but of damp earth, like something freshly dug. Margaret begged him to stop. He told her they were close to striking the largest vein yet. They would leave after that, he said. 1 more month. One night, a storm rolled over the mountains. The rain came in sheets, turning the paths into rivers. Samuel didn't come home. At dawn, Margaret wrapped herself in a shawl and walked to the mine. The camp was empty. Only a single lantern burned near the shaft, its flame flickering as the wind hissed through the opening. She called his name. No answer. Then she heard it. A voice from deep below, faint like a child calling for help. It sounded like her youngest, Ruthie, but all 3 children were asleep in the cabin. The next day, the men found Samuel's tools stacked neatly beside the lowest tunnel. His helmet lay on the ground, the oil burned out. No one ever saw him again. They said he must have fallen into an old shaft, one of the uncharted veins the company never mapped. They sealed the section off with timber. No one went down there after. Margaret tried to stay. She told herself he might still come back, that maybe he'd found another exit. But at night, the humming began again, this time in the cabin walls. The children heard it too. It made the youngest cry. Ruthie said it was Daddy singing from the ground. A week later, Margaret packed their things. She told the children they were leaving at dawn. But before sunrise, she vanished. The neighbors said they saw her walking toward the mine in her nightdress, barefoot, her hair dripping wet, though there'd been no rain. Her footprints led straight to the shaft and stopped. The eldest son, Daniel, went looking for her. He took a lantern and promised his sisters he'd be back before dark. He never returned. By the time the neighbors came, the Holloway cabin was empty. The door still open, the fire cold. Only Ruthie's doll lay on the table, covered in dust. Some said they heard voices echoing from beneath the ground that week. Whole conversations, faint but clear, as though the family was still down there, living, working, whispering. Others said the mine was cursed long before the Holloways ever came. Whatever the truth was, the company sealed it for good. Dead Man's Hollow became forbidden ground. But 50 years later, when a new company reopened the shaft, the workers found something waiting in the dark. In the winter of 1905, 50 years after the Holloways disappeared, a new mining company came to the Highlands. They called themselves Black Ridge Coal and Iron, and they had no patience for ghost stories. To them, the land wasn't haunted, it was untapped wealth. The old mine had been sealed for decades. The wooden barricades rotted, the records half burned. But the rumor of a rich, untouched seam beneath Dead Man's Hollow was too tempting to ignore. The men who came to reopen it were strangers. Tough, restless types chasing wages across the Appalachians. Their foreman was Elias Cobb, a man who laughed too loud and believed nothing he couldn't touch. He didn't care that the locals refused to work the Holloway site. When one of them warned him that the ground remembers, he spat and said, "Then it'll remember who owns it now." The first day of excavation was uneventful. They cleared brush, replaced beams, and rebuilt the hoist. The new machinery groaned like an animal waking from sleep. By evening, the men stood before the old entrance, a black mouth framed by collapsing timber. Someone had painted a crude cross over it decades ago. The symbol was nearly gone, washed pale by years of rain. Elias laughed at the sight of it and kicked the last plank aside. "There," he said. "Now she's breathing again." The air that came from the shaft was colder than the night itself. It carried the smell of something metallic, not quite rot, not quite rust, something old. A few men crossed themselves quietly. Others just stared into the dark, listening. For a moment there was nothing. Then came the faintest echo, like a sigh pulled through stone. Elias claimed it was just the air settling, though he looked over his shoulder when he said it. They started work the next morning. The drills shrieked against rock, sparks lighting up the tunnels. The deeper they went, the stronger the strange chill became. Lamps flickered. Voices carried farther than they should have. Men said they heard whispers through the stone, words they couldn't quite understand. One worker, Caleb Price, swore he heard children laughing somewhere below. He quit the next day without collecting pay. By the end of the week, the crew broke through the last barrier. It was the section the old company had sealed after Samuel Holloway vanished. The wood crumbled easily under their picks, too easily, as though something on the other side had been pushing against it all this time. A rush of air burst from the gap, wet and cold enough to frost the lamps. Several men swore they heard it speak, a low, dragging exhale that almost formed a word. Behind the wall lay another tunnel, smaller, hand-dug, unmarked on any map. Elias, determined to prove his authority, led them in himself. The ground sloped downward, tighter with every step. The smell of sulfur mixed with something sour, like decaying earth. Their lanterns cast jittery shadows across the walls. Symbols had been carved there, spirals, crosses, and shapes no one recognized. Then they found the first thing that stopped them cold. A pickaxe embedded in the wall, its handle worn smooth. The initials S.H. carved into the wood. Samuel Holloway. Elias grinned nervously, trying to hide his unease. "Looks like the old boy found gold," he said. "Let's see where he was digging." They pushed farther. The tunnel opened into a small chamber, half collapsed but still holding shape. In the center lay a circle of stones arranged like a crude altar. And scattered around it bones, not animal, not old enough to be dust. Someone muttered a prayer. Another man vomited against the wall. Elias barked for everyone to stay calm. Could be old miners caught in a collapse, he said. But even he sounded unsure. There were too many bones for that. Too many small ones. They left the chamber sealed that night. No one slept easy. In the morning they returned to find their tools missing. The lamps were lit, burning low as though someone had been there all night. Deep in the mine, a soft humming echoed, the same pattern over and over like a lullaby with no words. By the third day, 2 men were gone. Their names were never entered in the log. Elias claimed they'd walked out before dawn, but others said they'd gone down early, into the lower shaft, chasing the sound of voices. When they didn't come back, no one volunteered to follow. The company sent for replacements. Money spoke louder than fear, but Holloway's mine had already begun to take hold. The men grew pale, quiet, losing weight though they ate plenty. They said their dreams smelled of coal dust, that when they closed their eyes they saw lightless corridors winding forever downward. One night, a miner named Fletcher ran screaming from the shaft. He claimed he'd seen someone standing at the end of the tunnel, a woman barefoot, hair dripping wet. She called his name in a voice that wasn't human. She said she'd been waiting. He gasped before collapsing. The doctor said he'd inhaled too much coal gas, but the others knew it was something else. The next morning, Fletcher was gone. His boots were still by his cot. His lantern lay on the floor, the flame unburned. After that, men refused to go below. Elias tried threats, then bribes. Nothing worked. One by one they left until only a handful remained. The last entry in the company ledger was written in Elias's rough hand. Friday, October 27th. Lower tunnel secured. Proceeding to investigate source of sounds. That was the final record from the Black Ridge camp. The mine was abandoned again within weeks. Locals said the mountain sealed itself. Landslides covered the entrance, swallowing the timbers whole. The company pulled out and erased all mention of the site from their maps. But travelers still spoke of strange lights flickering between the ridges at night, and of low voices echoing from deep within the ground. Voices that sounded like they were singing. By 1936, the Holloway mine had become more myth than memory. Maps no longer marked it, and the few remaining locals of the Kentucky Highlands referred to it only in whispers. The old miners called it Dead Man's Hollow, though even they couldn't quite agree on whether the name belonged to the place or to the family who had vanished there. That year, an academic team from the Appalachian Institute of Geological Research arrived to survey the area. Officially, their expedition was about subsurface mapping and magnetic readings, but unofficially, they wanted to find the Holloway mine. Dr. Miriam Caldwell led the group, a geologist known for her precision and skepticism. She had studied earthquakes, magnetic anomalies and landslides all over the region, yet nothing had prepared her for what locals told her when she arrived in Harlan County. They warned her that the Holloways had dug too deep, that they had awoken something under the mountain that didn't belong to men. When she asked what exactly they had awoken, no one could say for sure. Some spoke of gas, some of ghosts, and others simply said the ground there wasn't natural anymore. Miriam dismissed it as folklore and focused on her readings, until her compass began to behave erratically, spinning without pattern even in calm weather. The team found the old path to the mine on the third day. It was hidden beneath decades of moss and bramble, leading up through pines to a clearing that felt unnervingly quiet. The remnants of machinery lay scattered, metal skeletons of carts and pulleys, rotted beams half swallowed by soil. The entrance itself had collapsed long ago, but as the crew dug carefully through the debris, they uncovered a fissure that looked freshly torn. Air rushed from it in cold bursts, carrying the unmistakable scent of iron and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. The miners in the party, old-timers hired as guides, grew pale. One muttered that the air was wrong, that it breathed too steady, as if the mountain itself were alive. When the first light shone inside, they saw that the tunnel continued far deeper than expected. It wasn't just a shaft, it was a descent. The walls bore strange patterns, almost deliberate carvings, spiraling downward like veins of stone. As the team moved carefully inside, their lanterns flickered despite the still air. Someone remarked it felt like stepping into a cathedral that had forgotten its god. At 20 meters down, they found the first bones. They weren't laid in any recognizable pattern, yet none were scattered randomly either. Some appeared fused into the rock itself, as if the earth had swallowed them mid-motion. Dr. Caldwell kept her composure, noting them clinically, but something in her tone changed when she found the second set, smaller, unmistakably belonging to a child. She told her assistant to take photographs, but the flashbulb refused to ignite, even after multiple attempts. When they finally forced a spark, the photograph came out blank, completely white. The assistant swore he had seen the image appear briefly in the developing tray, shapes of people behind the bones. But when he blinked, they were gone. Further inside, they discovered a vast chamber, unnaturally smooth. Its ceiling curved like the inside of a great dome. In its center stood a stone table, half eroded, covered in a thin layer of dust. The surface bore the faint outline of symbols, circles within circles, spirals intersecting with marks that resembled eyes. Beneath it, they found remnants of what might once have been tools. Hammers, chisels, and strange metal fragments that didn't match any known 19th century mining equipment. Miriam thought they looked more like surgical instruments than tools of labor. There was also a smell. Not rot, not gas, but something older. Metallic and dry, like the scent left by lightning after it strikes earth. And there was sound, faint and constant, though no one could identify its source. Some said it was wind passing through tunnels. Others thought it was the drip of distant water. But to Miriam it sounded eerily like a human hum. A tune repeating beneath the surface, steady and unbroken. They camped near the entrance that night, though few managed to sleep. One of the men, Robert Lyle, woke screaming just after midnight. He swore he had seen people moving in the dark, walking between the trees, whispering to one another in voices that sounded like the Holloways calling from underground. Miriam tried to calm him, telling him it was a dream brought on by exhaustion, but he refused to go back inside the mine the next morning. By noon, he was gone, his tent empty, his footprints leading to the fissure and then stopping abruptly at its edge. The remaining team continued, shaken but determined. They wanted answers. The air inside had grown heavier, denser somehow, as if it resisted intrusion. Lantern light distorted, stretching shadows across the walls that seemed to move, even when no one did. At one point, Miriam's assistant dropped his light, and for a moment total darkness consumed them. In that second, they all heard it clearly, A whisper, close, deliberate, spoken in perfect English. "You came back." They fled the mine in silence, but not all of them reached the surface. Jacob Turner, one of the researchers, vanished somewhere near the chamber. His voice echoed once behind them, calling for help, but when they returned to look, the path had changed. The smooth tunnel now twisted differently, and where the chamber had been, there was nothing but solid stone. Miriam Caldwell returned to the Institute weeks later. Her report was brief and strangely clinical, though her colleagues noticed her handwriting had changed, smaller, uneven, as if written by a trembling hand. She refused to discuss the Holloway mine in public, claiming the area was unstable and unsafe for future excavation. Yet, late one night, the janitor found her in the archive room, staring at the geological maps of Harlan County with a look of terror. She whispered that the mountain wasn't just earth, it was something that remembered. After she disappeared in 1938, her notebook was found among her things. The final entry contained a single line written 3 times over. "The Holloways are still down there. They never stopped digging." By the time the 1980s rolled through the Kentucky Highlands, the legend of the Holloways had thinned into something people told to spook tourists. The mine was gone from maps, the Institute's files sealed, and most of Harlan County had forgotten the name. But memory has a way of clinging to land. The mountain didn't forget, it waited. In 1982, a new wave of developers arrived, intent on reopening parts of the old coal region for commercial mining. Among the survey team was a man named Daniel Mercer, a pragmatic engineer who had no patience for superstition. He'd grown up hearing stories of the vanished family, but to him, the mine was just an untapped vein of carbon wealth. When his company purchased the rights to the Holloway tract, the locals shook their heads and told him it was cursed ground. He laughed. By summer, the first drills were ready. The day they broke through, the ground shook harder than expected. The initial blast went smoothly, but the tunnel sensors began picking up erratic readings, sudden shifts in air pressure, unexplained temperature drops. Workers complained of dizziness and nausea, though nothing in the air samples showed contamination. Then came the radio interference, strange feedback patterns, rhythmic and repetitive. When analyzed, the sound wasn't random. It resembled the structure of a human voice, though no words could be made out. Daniel stayed on site to oversee the investigation. He brought in seismic experts, geologists, and even a few from the University of Kentucky to monitor what he assumed was a fault line. Yet as they dug deeper, the readings only intensified. At 130 meters, one of the crew discovered a hollow chamber. Its interior was lined with the same unnaturally smooth stone described in Miriam Caldwell's lost notebook. The deeper they went, the more the air began to taste metallic, electric, like rain on copper. Then, a sound started again, low at first, almost like the vibration of machinery, but carrying something human in its rhythm. The first fatality came on the 4th day. A miner named Ellis Crowder fell from the scaffold and struck the lower rock face. When they found his body, his expression was frozen in an impossible scream, his eyes open so wide that the whites had torn. The coroner listed it as trauma and suffocation, but others swore they heard him shouting something before the fall. "They're still here," someone claimed he said. "They're still digging." By then, Daniel had begun having dreams. In them he saw tunnels that twisted like veins, walls that pulsed faintly, and faces emerging from stone. In every dream, he felt something watching from the dark. A presence neither human nor fully alien, something that existed before the mine, before the mountains themselves. He told no one, though the exhaustion was plain on his face. On the seventh day, they reached the Holloway chamber. The circular room was intact, untouched by time. It was identical to Caldwell's sketches that had somehow survived in the Institute's archives. Only now, it glowed faintly in places, thin cracks in the stone emitting pale light. When Daniel touched one of them, his skin tingled. Beneath the surface, something shifted. The walls seemed to breathe. The air grew warmer, heavier, like standing inside a furnace without flame. The crew set up recording equipment, capturing what they believed was seismic resonance. But the tapes played back differently. Instead of echoes, they contained voices, faint, layered, speaking in overlapping tones. One word appeared repeatedly when analyzed through spectrogram: down. By midnight, half the crew had refused to return underground. The remaining few stayed with Daniel, driven by equal parts greed and fascination. They descended again the next morning, only to find that the path behind them had changed. The tunnel walls had shifted. Where there had been one entrance, there were now two. They marked their route with paint, yet when they circled back, their marks were gone. The deeper they moved, the stranger the rock formations became. Veins of shimmering mineral lined the passage like capillaries, glowing faintly as if reacting to their movement. At one point, Daniel thought he saw faces within them, blurred impressions of eyes and mouths pressed just beneath the surface. He blinked, and they vanished. The chamber itself seemed to expand, revealing sections no one had noticed before. They found remnants of wooden supports older than the mine itself, embedded directly into the rock as if grown there. And in the far corner, partially buried under dust and shale, lay something that shouldn't have existed. A small wooden cradle, blackened with age. Inside it, a stone figure, carved roughly in the shape of a child, its features worn smooth except for its eyes, which were hollow. No one spoke for a long time. The air vibrated faintly, a hum that grew deeper the longer they stood. When Daniel finally stepped closer, the hum stopped. The silence was absolute, suffocating. Then faintly a whisper rose again, not from the air, but from inside his head. It wasn't words at first, only a rhythm. Then it formed a sentence he could understand. "You've come to finish the work." He stumbled back, dizzy. His light flickered, and for a moment he thought he saw movement within the walls, shadows that weren't his own. Then the floor beneath them shifted. The cave groaned. The sound of breaking stone roared through the chamber as if the mountain itself were waking up. The others ran for the exit, but Daniel stayed. He swore he saw figures emerging from the cracks, men, women, children, faces half-formed, bodies fused with the rock. Among them, one face stood out. A bearded man holding a lantern, eyes hollow, mouth open as if in prayer. Nathaniel Holloway. When rescuers finally reached the chamber 2 days later, the tunnel had collapsed completely. They found no trace of Daniel Mercer or his team. Only the recording equipment remained, its reels intact but warped. The sound on them was faint, yet unmistakable. The steady rhythm of pickaxes striking stone over and over in perfect unison. Decades later, the mine was sealed once more, declared unsafe by the state. Locals avoid the area, claiming the ground hums at night when storms roll over the mountains. Sometimes they say they hear voices rising from below, singing old miners' hymns in a language no one remembers. And still, when rainwater seeps through the soil of Dead Man's Hollow, it carries with it a faint shimmer, like dust made of iron. And if you listen closely, it almost sounds like breathing. By 2024, the Holloway mine had faded from all but the deepest corners of Appalachian folklore. The story of the vanished family, the doomed engineers, the humming mountain, all of it had become the kind of local ghost tale teenagers dared one another to whisper about around campfires. Yet some stories don't die. They only wait to be found by someone reckless enough to look again. That someone was a documentarian named Laura Kincaid. Her channel specialized in forgotten places, rusted towns, abandoned hospitals, sites that still breathed history in the dark. She'd come across the Holloway legend while researching Kentucky mining disasters. The official records made no mention of it, but she found scraps, old property transfers, death certificates, references to a sealed shaft under the name Project Holloway Tract 9. And then there was the notebook of Dr. Miriam Caldwell, recently digitized and stored in a university archive. Laura couldn't resist. She and her small crew drove deep into Harlan County with cameras, drones, and enough equipment to film for a week. The mountain greeted them with silence. No birds, no wind, just the slow creak of the trees as if something enormous stirred beneath them. When they found the overgrown path leading to the Holloway entrance, she knew immediately it was the right place. The fissure was still there, narrow but accessible, half hidden behind decades of moss. The air that came from it was cold and oddly dry, smelling faintly of iron. She began filming immediately, narrating the history as she knew it. How the Holloway family had gone missing in 1855 after reopening an old shaft. How strange magnetic readings were reported in 1936. How another crew disappeared in 1982. Her tone was steady, curious, and she smiled at the camera when she said, "Tonight we're going to see if the mountain remembers." The first night was uneventful. They set up camp near the fissure, recorded B-roll of the surrounding forest, and interviewed one of the local residents who came by at dusk to warn them away. The old man refused to step closer than the tree line. "It's not the dark you should be scared of," he said softly. "It's what's under it. That mine ain't empty. It's thinking." Laura laughed politely for the camera, but later that night found herself replaying the words. The next morning they entered the fissure. The tunnel descended more sharply than expected, the walls oddly smooth, the air thick with the scent of metal and something faintly sweet. The crew's lights flickered every few steps, their batteries draining faster than they should have. At 20 meters, they found a section of wall that shimmered faintly under the light. On closer inspection, the rock wasn't rock at all. It was fused bone, hundreds of fragments pressed together, forming a pale vein that ran through the stone like marble. None of them spoke for nearly a minute. Then one of the crew whispered, "It's human." Laura's camera caught everything, the pale surfaces, the glint of what looked like teeth embedded in the wall, the way the sound in the tunnel began to change. It wasn't just the echo of their movement anymore. There was rhythm now, faint but distinct. Tap, tap, pause, tap, like the distant echo of pickaxes. They pressed deeper, and the temperature dropped sharply. A white mist rolled through the passage even though there was no moisture source. The hum returned, low, slow, resonant enough to vibrate in their ribs. Laura turned the camera toward the end of the corridor where the mist thickened. "We're hearing something," she whispered. "If anyone's watching this, I want you to listen closely." The mist parted. For a moment, the camera caught shapes, outlines of figures standing perfectly still side by side as if waiting. Then the light flickered and they were gone. The tunnel seemed to expand suddenly, revealing a vast hollow chamber. In the center was a circular pit filled with black water that reflected nothing. The edges of the pit pulsed faintly as if the rock itself had veins. She leaned closer, shining her light into the depths. Something moved below the surface. It wasn't an animal, it was texture, skin, or something like it, stretched and rippling. She could swear she saw faces beneath the ripples, mouths opening and closing silently. Her sound tech shouted. Behind them, the tunnel had sealed. The entrance was gone. The rock was smooth, unbroken, as if it had never existed. Panic spread instantly. The lights failed one by one, leaving only the dim blue of the camera screen. The hum grew louder, merging with the sound of voices, hundreds of them, whispering over one another, all repeating a single phrase that rose and fell like breath. "We never stopped digging." The footage cut out there. 2 weeks later, a rescue team found their camp untouched, the equipment still stacked neatly beside the vehicles. But the mine itself was gone, collapsed, buried under tons of stone. The fissure had sealed completely. Only Laura's camera remained, half crushed but with the memory card intact. The video showed everything up until the moment of the collapse. The final frame frozen on Laura's face, her eyes wide, as if she had just realized something terrible. Experts analyzed the audio in that last clip. Buried beneath the static was another voice, older, slower, speaking almost like an echo. It said, "The mountain remembers." After the footage went viral, local authorities restricted access to the area permanently. But hikers still report strange vibrations beneath their feet when they pass near Dead Man's Hollow, especially during storms. Sometimes they say they hear tapping sounds under the soil, rhythmic and steady, like men working deep below. Others claim that on certain nights, if the wind hits the ridges just right, you can still hear singing, a faint hymn about salvation and light, carried upward through the rock. No one knows what the Holloways found beneath that mountain, what they unearthed that refused to stay buried. Maybe it was a natural phenomenon. Maybe it was madness passed down through the land. Or maybe the Holloways really did dig into something older than God, and maybe, somewhere deep beneath the Kentucky Highlands, they're still there, working, humming, waiting for the earth above them to split again, because some mines don't just take lives, they keep them. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for listening. Stories like these remind us that the past isn't dead. It's only waiting for someone curious enough to wake it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, share it with others who love dark history, and subscribe to the channel for more tales just like this one. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what you think really happened in the Holloway mine. Until next time, keep your lanterns lit and never dig too deep.